Welcome to our first video lecture notes for our World History 1 class. We are starting with the human origins notes that we've been talking a little bit about so far this year, and let's just kind of dive right in. So I have this image here kind of for two reasons. One, I think it's important for us to realize that this is the traditional kind of image that is used for looking at human origins, right? That you have this human evolution, that first we have chimp-like animals, and then slowly that morphs into something that we more readily recognize as fully human. But I also have it here because I think that this image is a little problematic. We've got, it kind of leads us to think that this same animal could have over time become a human, right? That there would have been in one lifetime this change, or even, within, a couple generations that there would be this change. And we know that this is actually not true, that this is a process that takes millions of years and specialized environmental scenarios that produce this kind of evolutionary change, right? Slow, at times seemingly meaningless changes accrue over the course of thousands of generations. So I start with this just because it is kind of the traditional view, and then we also have to realize that this is not entirely correct, right? You have the this the furthest to the left species, right? And then if you think, all right, fast forward 2 million years, you have the one to the right. Fast forward 2 million years, you have the one, and so forth. Okay, so it's important that if we're starting a conversation on human history, that we talk about what does it mean to be human, and to look all the way back to our ancestral past to understand that question. So that's really our objective for these notes. This unit is to understand the differences between these early species of hominids or hominids, depending on your preference. We'll actually talk a little bit about which one is correct in class. And then we'll also talk about how the understanding of those differences impact our understanding of us today. So that is our objective. That is something that we are hoping to accomplish this year. So let's start with my main man, Ardi. Ardipithecus ramidus was one of the most recent discoveries. In fact, when I first started teaching, Ardi was not in my notes. This was something that I've had to add over the years because the evidence seems to suggest that this hominid species was part of our ancestral timeline. So here he is. There he is. Isn't Ardi cute? I like Ardi. He seems very interesting. So Ardi was very short, more chimp-like than human, probably walked on all fours most of the time, with at times being able to stand on his hind two legs. Ardi would have been about 3 feet tall, fully grown. So we're not talking a very large animal here. But Ardi seems to fit into our ancestral past. The species was primarily tree-dwelling, so more similar to a modern-day chimp. And we actually know that because of the curved nature of their finger and toe bones. So the bones in their hands, right, are actually curved. So a chimp, even today, a tree-dwelling animal, their hands don't go flat, right? They're constantly curved to help them grip the branches that they're maneuvering around on. That is the fossil evidence that we have from Ardipithecus ramidus, right? This is all fossil evidence. That leads us to make the connection that they probably lived in trees, right? There's no trees that are still around after 4.5 million years. And there's certainly not any Ardipithecus ramidus running around to view in the wild. So all of this stuff is coming from fossil evidence. Now, the one thing that I think is really interesting about Ardi is that they seem to have a social structure where males helped raise children. And that's actually going to be one of our first discussion questions of this set of notes. So remember, on Schoology, there's going to be a question there. You're going to go in and think about what your answer might be. Don't look it up. Don't try to use outside sources. Just use your own head and try to think about how could we possibly know this? How could we know that Ardipithecus ramidus, that the males in that species may have helped raise children? So think about that, and then at the appropriate time, move over to Schoology and throw your answer to that question in the appropriate discussion thread. But we know that that's probably true. So it's interesting. It means that even as far back as 4.5 million years ago, you have a family structure, right? You have this social group where individuals are more likely to survive by cooperating instead of competing. And we'll see that that kind of becomes a theme in our evolutionary past. So that's Artie. We're going to move on to another very famous species, Australopithecus afarensis. Australopithecus afarensis. And if you don't like saying that, you can just say Lucy. Lucy is the name given to the skeleton that you can see, the fossilized skeleton that you can see there on the screen. That was defined by Donald Johanson in 1978, named after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, because that's the song that they were listening to when they were celebrating the discovery. So Australopithecus afarensis means something. If you're wondering what that means, it actually does have specific meaning. Australopithecus, Australo means south, right? So think Australia, right? Southern land. Australo means south, and Pithecus is a genus name for apes. So Australopithecus basically means southern ape. Afarensis means references the location that they were found. So they were found in the Afar region of Ethiopia. It is just a region of that country known as the Afar. So you get Australopithecus afarensis. I'll interchange Australopithecus afarensis and Lucy. They mean the same thing. I kind of use Lucy as a stand-in for the whole species just because it's a lot easier to say. So Lucy was discovered again in 1978 and was considered, up until Artie's discovery, the oldest hominid fossil that we had. So this is a remarkable find, especially the intact skeleton. And again, you can see, I may have mentioned this in class, but you can see how pretty much this is a very intact skeleton, that if something's missing from one side, like say the femur bone and the hip, it's fully intact on the other, so that archaeologists and primatologists can understand how Lucy would have walked. And that's how we can tell. We can tell that Lucy was definitely walking upright, almost exclusively, and that they were not still living in trees, despite the curved bones in their hands and feet. That was what we call vestigial. It was left over, right? It just hadn't evolved out of the species just yet. And you can see, based off of the skull there, that it's a very chimp-like skull, right? But it kind of looks like human teeth. And if you remember from the Ape to Man video, there was a lot to be focused on about skull and teeth and jaw and all that stuff. So this is kind of this was for a long time considered the missing link until we realized that there's more farther in the past. So this was 3 to 4 million years ago. In terms of how old Lucy was on the planet. And think about that. That means that Lucy was on the planet for about 1 million years, right? That is significantly longer than us. Significantly. Think about the timeline activity we did. 1 million years is a long time. A long time. We've only been around for about 40,000. So this 1 million years is, 50 times longer than our species has been on the planet? 50? 500? No, not 50. I don't know. My math isn't good. Don't quote me on that. But it's around a long time, a long, long time. Okay, so you can kind of see even in the mock-up there in the top right-hand corner. Oh, you actually probably can't see that because of my image. There you go. All right, so now you can see the teeth a little bit more clearly. Sorry about that. My head's in the way. But you can see right above that the mock-up of what Lucy would have looked like, based off of our understanding of what the bone structure of the skull and all those other things. So, and Lucy would have been short too. She's 3.5 feet tall, um, maybe 4 feet tall at the larger end. So a pretty, still much more ape-like than man. And I think that's going to change with our next species. And you'll notice a big change as well. So we're leaving the Australopithecus, and there's a few of them. The article that you've read talked about Australopithecus africanus, which is different species. So make sure you're paying attention to those differences. But for our notes, we're going to move right along to Homo. Nope, nope. Homo habilis. There we go. Homo habilis. Um, you can see that even in that mock-up, that it's starting to get closer to human, much closer to human actually. Homo habilis was discovered by Mary Leakey. This was one of the ones that she discovered while in Eastern Africa, and around the site of some of the Homo habilis fossils, we found stone tools. Um, those stone tools sparked a really big debate in archaeology and our evolutionary past. It's easy now to look back and say, oh, this is Homo habilis, or oh, this is Australopithecus africanus, or whatever. Um, but people had to decide where these species fit. What genus do they belong to? Do they belong to the ape genus or the human genus? Um, and there was a huge debate over where to put Homo habilis, this new species that was found by Mary Leakey. Um, and through a lot of debate and put pressure from Mary Leakey, they decided to put Homo habilis in the same genus as humans, right? That's the Homo genus. It means man, or human, right? It's where human comes from. So Homo habilis literally means handyman. It's because he was found with all these tools. So that's a nice, easy way for us to remember it too, that a handyman is someone who works a lot with tools. So Homo habilis, handyman, the first to be found with tools. Now, notice I'm not saying the first to use tools. We have no evidence that Lucy used or didn't use tools. Um, and I want you to think about that, and what that could mean, right? How that could change our understanding of our past, right? Maybe if we start to find Australopithecus afarensis species or fossils with tools around them, maybe that'll change. One of the reasons why we can't say they definitely didn't use tools is because they could have been using tools made out of wood or other things that would have decayed, like bones or something. Um, those things would have disappeared over 4 million years. So we have no evidence that they used tools. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think, this is another discussion board question, do you think that tools should be the distinguishing feature? Because that's essentially what we're saying here, that because this species used tools, that we have evidence that they used stone tools, that should place them within the human genus, that is something that humans do, that we've always done, and it is a defining characteristic of our human species, is tool use. So go on the discussion thread and tell everyone, me and the rest of your class, what you think. Tool use, do you think tool use should be a distinguishing human trait, so that defines where future discoveries will fall? Um, just because this what is currently the case doesn't mean that it can't change in the future. But more about Homo habilis. We can tell by the shape of its brain and the structures that seem to have been present there that they might have had speech capabilities, right? And even that skull in the far left corner looks more human than Lucy's did, right? Look at Lucy's skull compared to this skull, the Homo habilis skull, right? It's a lot closer to a human skull. The brain cavity is certainly a lot larger. Um, And depending on where that brain cavity looks, right, with the structure of that skull cavity, I guess I should say, we think that they might have had at least some sort of primitive speech, that they would have been able to at least communicate verbally in some way. Is it full-fledged human language? We don't think so. It's also impossible for us to know because there's no way to record if they were speaking. And again, you've got about 9 million years that Homo habilis was on the planet. That's going to be it for this video. We'll come back with part 2 on human origins next time. So please head on over to the discussion threads on Schoology and post your answers to the questions that I asked. I can't wait to see what you guys have to think. All right, I'll talk to you guys next video.